push financial reform because we begrudge success that's fairly earned. I mean, I do think at a certain point you've made enough money.
Well, there are some pigs in our country, and that's the word I use particularly to the people that don't care about the environment. They just want money, and they're greedy about it.
Those evil Wall Street traders.
My goodness.
I am stunned after 7 years on the air. I am stunned that there are still people out there that it's the greedy Wall Street bankers. That's who it is there. A few years back, it was the greedy oil companies. It's always somebody who is really greedy. Doesn't matter how many times I play Milton Friedman. Doesn't matter how many times I bring on people from Cato. Doesn't matter how many times I try to explain how capitalism works. You people are sucked in over and over and over again by the left's mantra that capitalism is bad. Capitalism keeps you down when it's just the opposite. Now, last week on Yahoo Finance, Peter Schiff, the guy that people laughed at when he said this bubble was coming and it was going to be bad. They laughed at him, ridiculed him, made him sound like he was a little wacky. Peter Schiff. And even now, so many of you out there, you don't believe. This was Peter Schiff last week on Yahoo Finance, and I want you to hear what he had to say.
Wake of renewed fears about sovereign debt in Europe, stocks falling on Tuesday, gold rallying. It's a perfect day for Peter Schiff, president of Europe Pacific Capital and author of several books, including How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. So, Peter, just what's happening in the here and now is what's going on in Greece and now spreading into Portugal. Is this the beginning of the end of this rally that we've seen the last year plus?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the market has rallied because it dropped substantially. You know, the Dow was cut in half in 2 months. And so when you have a 50% move in the stock market, you know, you're going to get a bounce, especially when you have a Federal Reserve throwing money at the market. And so you're going to have some kind of short covering bounce, oversold conditions. But a lot of people were confused. They thought that the market going up was somehow ratifying what the government had done, that the stimulus or the bailouts were good, that the economy was improving. It's not. The economy is in worse shape than it was in 2008.
It's in worse.
Joining me on the hotline right now, the president of Euro Pacific Capital and candidate for Senate, Peter Schiff. Hi, Peter.
Hey, and welcome back.
Oh, Peter, I'm telling you, the battle is, I was sitting here, the folks who can watch me on the camera, I'm exhausted trying to explain the value of capitalism to people. This most recent financial crisis has done a lot of damage in terms of PR, and the left has seized upon it, and they're grabbing with it, and they're running with it. It's no one ever talks about government's role in the financial collapse, Peter.
Well, this is par for the course. You know, you talked earlier about greed. Well, why doesn't anybody talk about the greed in Washington, D.C.? You know, the politicians are the greediest among us. It's just that they choose to exercise their greed through the force of government, which is inherently much more dangerous. And they also have greed for power and greed for votes, and all of this is what gave us the housing bubble. It wasn't created by Wall Street. Wall Street certainly played the hand that the regulators dealt them, but they dealt it. The Federal Reserve deliberately lowered interest rates down to 1%, so that people could buy houses that they couldn't afford, so that Americans could keep shopping when they should have been saving. All that was designed to artificially stimulate the economy and prevent the free market from correcting the imbalances that resulted from the dot-com mania. And, you know, you had Freddie and Fannie that were guaranteeing mortgages so that lenders didn't care if borrowers could repay the loans because they knew the government stood behind them. Or you had government agencies forcing banks to make loans to people who were not creditworthy because the politicians wanted their votes. This whole thing was created deliberately by government to have an artificial boom so that they could get reelected, so that voters could think that their policies were making them rich even as they were making them poor.
Federal guarantees people don't understand. You get a guy like Chris Matthews who says, well, a federal guarantee, that saves us when we have this kind of situation that it might happen. But what they don't understand, and what apparently the current senior senator from Connecticut, the seat that you would like to replace, he doesn't understand, is that the minute you put a safety net underneath it, Wall Street, anyone else is going to take advantage of that. Hey, I got a safety net. I can take more risk. If there were no safety net, these people don't seem to understand. If there were no safety net, if you didn't have artificially low interest rates, if you didn't have a Fannie and Freddie saying, hey, no worries, we'll back everything up with our own bucks, which happen to be our bucks, they wouldn't take that kind of risk because they couldn't afford it, Peter.
Yeah, well, nobody understands the moral hazard, and one of the easiest ways to look at it, because it's something every American can identify with, is the moral hazard created by government-insured bank accounts. Just about every American has a bank account, but not a single American cares what their bank does with their money. Nobody is worried. There is no version of Consumer Reports that ranks banks based on safety of their loan portfolios, because nobody cares. Everybody knows that if your bank fails, the government is going to make good your deposits. So nobody cares. All we care about is which bank is paying the highest yield on their CD. Well, in order to pay the high yield, they have to take more risk. And there's no benefit to them for not taking risk and giving us a safe portfolio because they won't have any deposits. So the government creates a situation where nobody cares about risk. And so there's a lot more risk-taking. But that's not the free market. The free market wouldn't have let that happen. The free market never would have allowed people to buy homes that they couldn't have afford. It was government guaranteeing the mortgages that made it all happen. And, of course, what made housing seem so affordable to so many people was because they could get an introductory rate, a low teaser rate. But where did that come from? That was a gift of the Federal Reserve. That was a gift of Alan Greenspan. He fooled everybody into thinking they can afford houses that they really couldn't. But none of that would have happened if we had a free market. The free market wouldn't have set interest rates that low. Only government would be that foolish.
Absolutely, Peter. No bank ever would have loaned. I can't remember a time growing up. I remember when growing up, my dad would say, how do you buy a house? And he said, well, if you don't have the cash, you have to borrow. And the only way you can borrow is prove to the bank that you can afford to make those loan payments because they have to get paid back. That kind of attitude is disappeared. It has evaporated, and it has left us.
And give them a big enough down payment so that they have some collateral.
Remember
when they know that you can save a down payment. What are we doing now in the mortgage market? Fannie and Freddie are bigger than ever before. We have given them more power. More mortgages are being guaranteed by the government today than at any point leading up to the housing bust. So we're compounding our mistakes. And this new financial regulation doesn't even deal with the situation at Freddie and Fannie, which is much more problematic than the things that they are dealing with.
And of course, this is probably the most famous soundbite of all. This was when President Bush and a number of senators in Congress were trying to rein in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They realized that their reserve requirements were way too low given the kind of risk they were taking, and we get Barney Frank saying this.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not in a crisis. The more people, in my judgment, exaggerate a threat of safety and soundness, the more people conjure up the possibility of serious financial losses to the Treasury, which I do not see.
And yet they walk away, they skate away like it was all the evil Wall Street bankers.
Yeah, meanwhile, the guys at Fannie and Freddie made a fortune, but the politicians couldn't see this disaster coming. I was, 2 years earlier than that, I was predicting that Fannie and Freddie would go bankrupt, that it would cost the Treasury a fortune if they got bailed out, because it was obvious to me that they were insuring mortgages that were going to go bad. They were letting people buy houses based on their ability to afford the teaser rate. Fannie and Freddie were guaranteeing mortgages based solely on the borrower's ability to afford the temporarily low teaser rate. They didn't even bother to check to see if they can afford the resets once they kicked in. Only government would be that incompetent, but they didn't care. It wasn't their money, and the politicians didn't want to stop it because they loved the housing bubble, because it made the voters feel like they were getting rich, and they rewarded incumbent politicians by sending them back to Washington, and nobody wanted to rain on that parade. And now that the bubble has burst, the bubble that the government inflated, now what are they doing? They're looking for people to blame, and they're trying to vilify capitalism, which isn't the problem. And what is the solution? More government meddling, more government regulation, bigger government, which is just going to create a bigger problem.
We're talking with Peter Schiff, candidate for Senate here in the United States, wants to take Chris Dodd's seat. Peter, can you stay with me?
Sure.
Okay, because I got to take a commercial break. When we come back, Peter has sort of an ominous prediction that he gave to Yahoo Finance about what's in store if we don't change our evil ways real soon. I also want to talk to him a little bit about his candidacy for the Senate. So everybody stay right there. Fasten your seatbelts. Peter Schiff is my guest. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Hour number 3 of Sound Off Connecticut. I'm Jim Vicevich, and on the hotline with me is Senate candidate, U.S. Senate candidate Peter Schiff, also president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Peter, you said you told Yahoo Finance that you thought we might be in worse shape now than previously.
Well, it's not that we might be. We are. We've gone deeper into debt than, if the government would have allowed the economy to correct the imbalances that had been built up during the housing bubble, we would be, repairing the damage that was done to our economy. Instead, we're compounding it. See, during the housing boom, which was a function of Fed, monetary policy and government subsidies and guarantees, Americans collectively spent too much money. Didn't save enough money. We bought too much stuff. We didn't produce enough stuff. Too much of our resources went into things like housing, and not enough of our resources went into things like manufacturing. And so the economy needs to restructure on a more stable foundation, because economies grow because of savings, because of underconsumption, because of capital investment. They don't grow because we spend money. We spend money because economies grow. But for a while, we were able to do it backwards because of this credit bubble. Well, instead of allowing the painful recession, the government decided to stimulate the economy with more cheap credit, and as a result, we're now deeper in debt. Except the extra trillions of dollars of debt has been assumed by the government. So instead of inflating an asset bubble, they've inflated a government bubble, which is even more dangerous, because the bigger the government gets, the weaker the real economy gets. And so we're destroying the parts of the economy that need to grow and expand so that we can produce wealth and provide jobs. And we are creating this ticking time bomb, which is this government bubble, and when it bursts, you're going to see a collapse in our bond market, you're going to see skyrocketing interest rates, and you're going to see runaway inflation. And if we don't get that, if we try to prevent interest rates from rising, if the Fed decides to buy all the bonds that the Chinese no longer want, that the Japanese no longer want, if we try to keep interest rates artificially low because we can't afford to let them go up, then we will destroy the value of our currency completely, and we will have runaway or hyperinflation and complete and utter chaos in this country.
It's very well thought out, and it's very logical and thought through, Peter. Stay with me. We're going to just check traffic. I'm not even going to turn your sound down. Here's Nicole Davis. Peter, we have some people here who think that I'm actually in bed with you, although the night's still young, if you know what I'm saying. But I haven't endorsed anybody on this right now. How is the campaign going? Where are you headed, and what are you doing?
Well, I think the campaign is gaining some momentum. I was initially, and I guess still am, the outsider, but, I'm making more and more progress, as I move around the state and meet with people and talk to people. I'm picking up some endorsements of some of the Republican town committees. I picked up the endorsement of the New Haven Tea Party. There is a lot of support for me. I have more donations from more people than any of the candidates. In fact, I have more donors than all the other candidates combined. People who want to help me, my campaign website is schiffforsenate.com, and we can use volunteers. I know I have more volunteers than all the other candidates combined, but we can still use more. It's a real grassroots campaign. We can use more donations. All of the donations to my campaign, 100% of them have come from individual donors, and mostly in small increments. I think my average donation is under $100. And I've still raised over $2 million in those small donations.
The site is peterschiffforsenate.com?
Yeah, Schiff. Yeah, not Peter Schiff, just schiffforsenate.com. And I have a new book that just came out. They mentioned it on that Yahoo Finance, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. hopefully if a lot of people can buy that book and read it, particularly in the state of Connecticut, they'll have a real understanding about the mess this country is in, how Washington caused it, and how they're making it worse, and how sending me to Washington is the first step in turning things around.
Peter, we will put a link to that on the blog as well. We'll direct people to it. Peter Schiff, everybody, president of Euro-Pacific Capital and candidate for Senate in Connecticut. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks for having me on.
Bye. We'll be right back.